So a couple of years ago, the life of the Apostle Paul was turned into an art house movie. This is an oftentimes overlooked Christian films when we talk about Christian filmmaking, even though this is starring Jim Caviezel, who played Jesus in Mel Gibson's movie. The filmmakers behind Paul, Apostle of Christ, made a historically accurate movie that really had some bold creative choices. This doesn't look and sound like your typical Christian movie, but there are also really some significant flaws that really disappointed me. So Paul the Apostle of Christ was released in 2018 and is set in Rome after the death and resurrection of Christ. And Luke, played by Jim Caviezel, risks his life in order to visit Paul, who is held captive in a Roman prison. Together they struggle against a determined emperor, and they craft writings that will forever change the way we think about Christianity and live our lives as Christians. The Apostle Paul has been really meaningful for me. His letters have contributed a lot to make the Gospels more practical and understandable for my day-to-day everyday life. In addition to that, Paul has such a remarkable story, like going from a thug to a saint, like one of the most meaningful people in all of Christian history. There is so much material that is so interesting to turn it into a movie when we look at the life of the Apostle Paul. So the interesting thing is really, what does a movie decide to focus on specifically? And if I'm being honest, I don't really care about historical accuracy in films. Sure, there has to be some groundwork to be done in order for a film to resemble reality. But anytime you put real life into a fictional narrative, it becomes drastically different than what really happened. And I think films need to embrace that fact instead of running away from and trying to be as historically accurate. We need to embrace the way movies deviate from reality, because this personal touch can really bring out a lot of creative opportunities that can speak truth in a way that is way deeper than just showing and telling you what really happened in the most accurate, but also in the driest way possible. And this is the problem that this movie right here, unfortunately, really taps into. But first of all, this movie looks and sounds really artistic. Like, the sound design is so immersive and the score is like big and emotional, just like it should be. The visuals, on the other hand, do a really great work of putting you into the rooms and into the scenes. Like, the way they lit the scenes, this is what I imagine that biblical times actually look like. The interiors at night are super dark, way darker than they should be. And on the other hand, there are some really abstract dream sequences that tell us some things through flashbacks about the character's past that are really effective and impressive. But one thing the movie never really balances out, being dialogue driven and visual. Like, the film is way too dialogue heavy, and the scenes actually aren't backed up by enough drama going on. I mean, this is one of the most dramatic times ever. Like, in this film, you see Christians being tortured and killed in the streets and in really shocking ways. But the narrative and the actual story that is being told and written really doesn't have a lot of tension, and that makes for a movie that is quite boring. I mean, out of 90 minutes, about an hour of that is actually quite boring, and you have like 30 minutes of like really good filmmaking and scenes. And this is so unfortunate because this material is so interesting. And I mean, things like the acting, for example. The acting is like pretty flawed. I mean, I've seen two movies starring Jim Caviezel. One was this one, and then I saw Sound of Freedom, and I really loved his performance in Sound of Freedom. But now seeing two movies and seeing a couple of interviews, like, I can tell he's a genuinely good guy, but as an actor he does the same thing over and over again. Like, it's really monotone, and the whole acting in this movie is very monotone overall. When it comes to the entire cast. But then again, there are some really great highlights, like the dream sequences I mentioned, like the nightmares Paul has that really bring back his shame when it comes to his past and painful memories. Like, this is really, really well done, artistic and creative and effective. Then there are some moving and thought-provoking dialogue scenes between Paul and the villain of the movie, the Roman emperor. Another thing that I really don't like about a lot of these biblical movies is the depiction of romance. It's like every single movie and TV show like I've seen so far, the Romans are these careless, characters that are ice cold, without passion, that do awful things but don't really care about them, that are really intelligent but not in a deep way, but only on a surface-based level. And I don't know anything like when it comes to historical researches about Romans, and I imagine that these depictions in biblical movies are based on some kind of research, but still, depictions of Roman characters in biblical movies really feels cliche at this point. I mean, if you've seen like 2, 3 Bible-based movies, it's like every Roman character is the same kind of guy. Again, another thing I liked about the movie is it really showed how challenging it must have been for like the first generation of Christians, and it really demonstrates you how many people sacrificed their lives in order for us to have Bibles in our homes today and read them and live our lives freely as Christians. Like, it's really not something we should be taking for granted. And hearing about the first Christians ever is really mind-blowing again and again for me. One of the major things that really disappointed me with this movie is that the movie really has more focus on Luke instead of Paul. I don't know why, like this movie is named after Paul, but the screen, Luke does have significantly more screen time than Paul, at least it feels like that. All the missed opportunities put aside, why is this a Christian film that I think is important, should be seen and really matters? It's a movie that really feels, looks and sounds like a proper movie. It's also really dark. I think more Bible adaptations should be as dark as this, and more faith-based Christian movies in general. Like, there are too many faith-based and Christian movies that are lighthearted and uplifting, and don't get me wrong, it's great if a movie is uplifting and lighthearted, but Christianity, Christian history, and the Christian message does carry a certain weight with it. And I think the darkness of this movie is something that more Christian films need. Because then when eventually the gospel gets preached in one way or another in these films and we see light, the way the films can show light is more authentic, because you also have the darkness and evil kind of balancing that and really putting the power of the Christian message into a real perspective instead of just being preachy and propagandistic. Like, Christianity does recognize sin, the darkness, the evil, the consequences of sin, and then shows you a way out. And this is what, at least for me, my experience for my walk as a Christian has been like. It's not just all good all the time. Like, it's difficult, it's hard, and it's challenging. But in Christ you find peace and belonging, identity, values that make these challenges so much lighter. Jesus was perfectly balanced. He was serious but also lighthearted. He was direct in his speech but also elaborate and had like a way with words. And that's why I don't want to see Christian movies that are like one-sided. Christian movies, I think, should try to be as balanced as Jesus. Alright guys, this is it for my review right here. Thank you so much for your time and attention watching my video. I wish you all a blessed day and hope to have you back in my next video.